Hari Om Shri Guru Namaha. Namaste everyone. And once again, we are continuing the series of Vedanta and Psychology with BMG, who is a practicing psychotherapist and a student of Western philosophy as well. And today's topic is going to be cultural ideas of psychology in the light of Vedanta. So BMG, if you could start us off.
Okay. So just in order to have a meaningful conversation, we're going to look at some of the Western ideas that are prevalent within the popular culture. And we're going to look at it in the context of Swami Dayananda's psychology, as opposed to Western psychology. And so just to start to set up things, in order to understand Swami Dayananda properly, is that the context is always this. What does it mean to be free while we're living our lives? What does it mean to be free? And fundamentally, the fundamental principle in Vedanta is that the way we are is untrue and unreal. And the solution to this problem is learning what it means to be true or not false, and to be real as a person. So we're looking at a change in the individual from being false and unreal to being true and real. And the other interesting part is that the freedom that Vedanta unfolds is that freedom is in being what we really are and being lifted out of what we seem to be. So this whole problem of what is the life and being that I am, what is that? And straight away, we have this idea that the life and being I am is mainly myself as a psychophysical entity with lots of thoughts and feelings, and I take my life and being to be the activity of these thoughts and feelings. It's sort of like my life and being is confused with, like being and in Latin, confused means poured together. So I'm poured together with my psychology and my physicality, and I take this to be my life and being only. Okay? And so we hit the first kind of contemporary thinking, which is called, philosophically, it's called materialism. So can we go into what we mean by materialism?
Yes, please.
So when we talk about materialism, we're not talking about wanting to have houses and money. We're talking about a view of reality, is that reality is material, that there's nothing more than material processes, physical and chemical and biological processes. That's it. So there's no being is to be material. So that there's nothing spiritual, there's nothing anything else except basically as my daughter was once, she went to the university, and this science professor got up and goes, "You are science." You mean, in other words, your life and being is just simply mechanical processes, material processes. That's what it is. Your consciousness is actually just simply an outgrowth of these processes. You're just simply a material entity. This is materialism as a philosophy. This philosophy pervades our culture, pervades it. And so that's one of the ideas, but when we look at Vedanta, Vedanta doesn't deny material processes or any of that stuff, but it says that the life and being you are is not a material processes. It doesn't come from material processes. Do you see what I mean? But it does recognize that you often take yourself to be these material processes. but that is what is a mistake. Now, when we talk about a mistake in Latin and the breakup, mis means wrong, take. So when we take something to be what it's not, that is a mistake. So when we're looking at materialism from a Vedantic point of view, we would say that is a mistaken ontology or a mistaken view of reality. However, if I have that as a view, if I live in a culture that actually promotes and forwards that, in a culture that promotes that and forwards that as an ideology, and it's all pervasive, what happens is the openness to, or the sense of the sacredness, which is very evident in India. It's not, that doesn't really exist in our culture now, the Western culture. It's been destroyed. And this is what we call scientific materialism. Okay, and it reduces the human being to material processes and denies anything that we would call, so that, for example, I was talking to a person who actually now studies Vedanta, but he told me, well, I'm an atheist. And I said, oh, really? Okay, that's fine. And I said, so what you're saying to me is that your daughter, all she is just simply, she has the value and the status of this cup that I'm holding. It's just simply, there's just simply physical, that's it. That's all she is. She's just a complex arrangement of things. And his face went like this, because sometimes people don't really examine the implications of their positions. But because it's quite evident that our child, there's more to them than just simply stuff moving, so a whole complex of processes. So we live in what we would call a very materialistic, philosophically a very materialistic the materialistic paradigm is extremely strong.
Right.
Okay, so and out of that parallel, see, have you ever heard of, and then we have what we call secular humanism. Have you heard of secular humanism?
Yeah.
This is the idea that, okay, there's no spiritual reality or whatever, but we've got this wonderfulness of human nature, and it's got all these possibilities, and what we can do is, we've got humanistic values, you know what I mean, in the sense that, that we can create goodness and stuff like that by decision and all of this sort of stuff. And so we live in a humanistic society that doesn't recognize any transcendence whatsoever. And again, it's reductionistic because it's basically materialistic. You can't get away from it. So that we make the best of a thing. Okay, we're a human being, but we can do something about life by living a good life and all of this sort of stuff. So the idea of life without the spiritual dimension it does not exist. And so you have this. And because of this, there's no such thing as, in our Western tradition, we would say that that conscience is from the heart of man. It's given to us by God. Traditionally, that's what that meant. The Hindus have the view of Dharma, which is the sense of right and wrong is not socially constructed by forces. So we have this view that right and wrong is culturally constructed, and the way they say that is, what happens is we are brought up in a family, and the family is a microcosm of the culture, and we learn what is right and wrong is actually put into us from the environment. It's not an inward direction that we can learn to trust and that can govern our life. It's put into us by what, don't do that and you should do that. Right? So so right and wrong is just simply socially constructed, and it's arbitrary. It's just it's not, there's not really a right and wrong. It's just simply socially constructed. Okay, so again, and this is, you get to the next thing, you get what we call pluralism, like everything goes, there's no right and wrong. It all depends on circumstances and all of this sort of stuff. So these are...
Is that the same as moral relativism?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So moral relativism basically says, well, okay, of course there's no, because you see the whole humanistic stance of the Renaissance is man is the measure of all things. Can you imagine that? Man is the measure of all things. So this human animal, right, which as a human being demonstrates and dramatizes some of the most vicious forms of violence that we've ever seen. When the guy that wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, Gibbons, came to the end, you know what he said? The history of man is a history of crime. So if the hope, now I have sympathy for the Enlightenment, really, which was when we freed ourselves from the clutches of the church.
Right.
But when it goes that man is the measure of all things, in the sense that there's nothing except us, and from ourselves we can do stuff. Do you know what I mean? So that there's no again, the whole story is there is no transcendence. There is nothing beyond the world of the senses and our thinking. And there's no right and wrong. There's no universal right and wrong. Even though we see that, we see sometimes extraordinary things, people being very brave, willing to die for what we would say is good. And so in this world that we live in, particularly in the Western culture, there's a tremendous, it's devoid of a sensitivity, if you like, to anything higher. Now, in our Western tradition, for example, there was a Greek philosopher by the name of Plato, and he recognized that, wait a minute, when you actually can appreciate beauty, the fact that, that your heart can be moved by beauty. Now, how come we as human beings can cognize beauty? It's not just simply the action of the senses, which can only show us color and form. It's not the product of intellectual thinking. It's like there's a part of us in our heart that can see something beyond just simply the senses and our conceptual thinking,
Right.
which is formed by our culture.
Yes.
And so he talked about the good, that the soul seeks the really good.
So would you call this tapping into the order, being in harmony with the order?
Well, no, recognition that there's something beyond just simply physical existence.
Right.
Like again, people can implicitly come into harmony with the order without knowing the meaning of what they're doing.
Right.
People can implicitly follow their conscience without religious beliefs. Right? So some people are born, they may not be a believer of anything. However, they are governed by this inner sense of right and wrong, where it has a dynamic influence in their life.
Right.
And what these people are, what we say, they're good people. do you know what I mean? But even that, when I was a young fella, we used to put money in the milk jar, and in the post office box at the end of the farm, on the end of the driveway. No one would steal it, Prashant. So we had a culture that was quite good. It wasn't perfect, but there was a social cohesion. If we did that now, it'd get stolen.
Right.
So we have been in the West. We've been for when culture starts to collapse. the thing, the setting and the environment that we're in that was supportive of social cohesion and people working together and cooperation, that's gone. There's been a massive destruction of that within our world now. And I've seen it. I'm 65 years old now, and it's accelerated, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. So, and with that too is do you know that we are the first culture, this Western culture, and when I say Western culture, I think it was, I've forgotten who said it, it was a brilliant, after they started World War I, they said, I've forgotten his name, but they said to him, what do you think of Western civilization? He says, it sounds like a good idea. We should try it sometime.
Right. I think that's referring to Vivekananda, I believe, right?
No, there was something else. There was another guy.
Gandhi?
He's a Western thinker, but he said this. But
okay.
The thing is that culture in Latin means growth.
Yeah.
We haven't got culture. We are the first culture to actually be atheistic. We're the first culture that every culture normally has some religious forms, some traditions, you know what I mean, in terms of some recognition that there's something beyond just simply physical life. But this culture is the very first culture that has now become virtually devoid of that. And that's quite remarkable.
Yes.
But in terms of unhappiness, all of the myths and the stories of Western culture, you know what I mean, like books that were written in the 1890s and, you know, was about how do you develop character and what's it like to be a good human being, all of this sort of stuff, right?
Right.
Now it's about how to make as much money as you can. Do you mean like so there's been a tremendous change and there's been a collapse. See, culture protects the individual. So a culture preserves and protects the individual, gives them a sense of place and, you know, kind of like how to relate to other people. It's a very necessary thing.
Yes.
Tradition is a very necessary thing. It protects people against unnecessary anxiety. It helps them work together. There's a direct relationship between our so-called mental health, if you like, because the formation of our personality, the stronger the culture, the stronger the individuals that live within that culture.
Right.
But what's happened, and it has a very profound effect on the person. So in our Western culture, in fact, what's happened is a collapse of culture. And so what we do is that's where the Marxists come in, you know, Homo economicus, you know, like, you know, we're only economic animals.
Yeah.
And we're only cultural animals. And that's why we have the rise of the cultural wars now, you know. So we have this unbelievable collapse of the culture. Mm-hmm. And out of this culture, you have, and out of the fact that there's no, people don't come into hardly any influence, religious influence now, in any real sense in our Western culture. And so you have this tremendous emptiness, because if the meaning of life is to have as many kicks as you can before you cark it, have great sex, have exciting experiences, make lots and lots of money, have lots and lots of fun, you know, like be a consumer, like a greedy little animal. That's all we are. We're just simply, the meaning and purpose of our life is to consume. Out of that comes a tremendous emptiness, which is now a psychological emptiness, which is becoming more and more evident. Yeah. And with all of the consequences of that, because people who are empty and where life is no longer meaningful, no longer full of meaning. Do you know what I mean? Like people are just simply objects of pleasure. You know, you treat them well if they make you feel good, you treat them well. If they don't make you feel good, you hate them. So when you have this collapse of culture, which is going on, unless we find what is truly real and truly good, do you know what I mean? What in our Western tradition we call it the summa bonum, the supreme good of man. If that is not discovered, I think there's I think it's your Hindu term is Shreyas, isn't it? Is it Shreyas?
Shreyas would be the pursuit of moksha.
Sorry?
Shreyas would be the pursuit of moksha.
Right, yes, which is the supreme good. Do you know what I mean? So, but that doesn't even exist as a notion in our Western culture.
Right.
You see, the Hindu culture is a very strong culture, and I got exposed to it when I lived in India. There's a tremendous sense of the sacred in India.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? You have very intelligent people who study Western science and Western physics and stuff like that, but they don't become these horrible self-asserting atheists who are like religionists anyway.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So, but that ability to be able to excel intellectually within this Western scientific thing, and yet still protect, they still have a sense of their own culture and tradition and all of that stuff. Very, very strong. It's quite extraordinary, actually, that the Indians as an indigenous people have managed to retain their culture in spite of the onslaught of Western culture. Now, I think it's in extreme danger now because of the internet and because of the pornography and the influences of. I think it's under assault. Do you know what I mean? And that will have its problems. But the thing is that you can tell with I'm not moralistic, but you see in India, you saw the woman look really beautiful, aesthetically beautiful, the way they clothing, the way they moved and all this stuff. But you look in the West, you know what I mean? And the thing is you see young girls at 8 or 9 years old being sexualized, making kind of sexual, and I'm not a moralist, but there's something very obscene about that.
Right.
And the sense of that women have to be sexy. Do you know what I mean? They have to be a sexual commodity.
This term twerking has become a huge thing. I don't know if you've heard. There's a term called twerking. There's a term called twerking where kids, even who are like 8 or 9 years old, would just wear skimpily dressed clothes and they would start gyrating and shaking their hips, and it's become a thing. It's
right, and it's a shocking thing.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So, but this is so. When we look at the context and particularly the relevance of a teaching like Vedanta to culturalist people who experience the angst of this, the angst in their life, our only hope as Westerners is to gain the inner direction that comes from an understanding of Dharma. Because we can't necessarily embrace another religion from another culture. Do you know what I mean?
So can I ask a couple of questions before we get to this topic? So you mentioned that the West has ultimately dropped off their traditional symbols and they have accepted a materialistic, amoralistic, human secularist society.
Yep.
Now, and you also mentioned that this is actually bad psychologically. It's bad in every single way because they are being deprived of the archetypes, whether it's a father figure or it's a deity figure or it's any sort of figure. Now they have no one to look up to. And so my question from a psychological standpoint would be that why would somebody leave something good when ultimately it's going to injure them? So what is the appeal?
Can you speak a bit slower so I can understand you, Prashant? Okay.
Yes. When clearly the choices that the current Western society is making are leading them towards a fall. What is the appeal of these philosophies such as moral relativism or postmodernism? Like, what is it that really pulls them towards it, psychologically speaking?
Well, again, I would say, like what Dayananda would say, that the problem is the individual, centered on the individual. That when you see, we have 4 psychological strivings. When the striving of Dharma does not play in a person's life psychologically, doesn't move them. When the longing for God or the absolute no longer moves them, and all they are governed by is pleasure and security, you know, everything, it's a sick, I mean, even Freud, right? Freud was, I'm not talking about his insights as a thinker, but he was a scientific materialist.
Okay.
He even said the best we can do is take someone who's neurotically miserable and unhappy and make them normally unhappy.
I see.
Right. So because he's being honest, like the problem, when we look at the problem, is that like we used to have a category called conscience. It was considered, a very important category in the West. Do you know what I mean? It was, like even the Catholics said that even if ultimately you have to follow your conscience, even if it goes against the church, they said, even if you get burned for it, but you have a moral duty to follow your conscience. It was considered a very important thing.
Yes.
Now that conscience doesn't exist now as a category, and particularly with the prevalence of cultural Marxism, it says there's no such thing as conscience. You see that when you see what happened with there used to be economic Marxism, which was to try gain control over distribution and wealth and all of that stuff, right?
Right.
In the 60s, it turned around and it started cultural Marxism, which was, what's important is that the individual is created by the environment, which is a materialistic idea.
Yes.
And because the individual is created by the environment, if the individual is unhappy, it's that because the environment is the problem.
Right.
So what we do is we create a collectivist, a lovely and utopian environment. Do you know what I mean? And where no one hurts anybody, no one says that you're bad or wrong. If we create this wonderful culture environment, that's going to solve the problem of the human being, because the human being is a product of that environment. Now, there's a truth to that. There is a truth to that, but but understand, you see how what's not seen is that the problem of the individual is that if they're not governed by Dharma and this longing for God, if this is not active in them, if it's asleep in a sense, right? Because the culture doesn't expose them to any religious teaching anymore. They just expose them to toys, technological toys like TV, iPhones, video games, all of this stuff. Of course, a person's going to be unhappy if I'm only moved emotionally by security and pleasure. That's it. Psychologically, I'm going to be torn apart. And on top of that, if I don't have a culture that nourishes growth. Now, for example, I'm from New Zealand, and this Maori woman, there's a lot of our Indigenous people end up in jail.
Okay.
So this Maori woman went into the jail. It was amazing. She's this little Maori woman, but she taught these big tattooed, mongrel mob members and black power members, like they belong to the Maori gangs. And she taught them carving, Maori carving, and she taught them culture and the songs and the art forms and all of this stuff.
Okay.
Now, and what happened was the reoffend rate was about 5%.
Ooh.
Because you see, when you rip people from their culture, you you hurt them. Now, Swami Dayananda makes this very good point in a talk called Conversion is Violence.
Yeah.
And that's why he never tried to take me from my own culture and force me to become a Hindu. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like I'm under the sway of a Hindu teaching, actually. But the thing is that I'm a Westerner, right? But the idea that like culture is so important, Prashant, to give you a basis. Do you see what I mean? We have all the evidence of this. But culture in the real sense, that's why I disagree with the cultural Marxist agenda, is they want to destroy culture, tradition, and custom because they consider it oppressive.
Right.
It doesn't allow the individual to be free. And because all on the basis of if we can create a nice cultural setting, then the individual will be right. Now, it's true that the culture is very important in the formation of the individual, but their solution is wipe tradition or whatever, because that's all part of a patriarchal, oppressive thing.
Okay.
So we completely wipe that out, and we're going to have this wonderful new utopian world. And so what happens is the utopian world they're wanting to create becomes the most important thing. And, they asked Trotsky, after the revolution, because you see, if you read these people, if you read early Trotsky or even Lenin or Pol Pot or Mao Zedong, you'd think these are wonderful people. They said, we're concerned, we want people to live happily. It was all about compassion. But but they were willing to kill and murder people for this ideal, and they did with gay abandon. Because you see, because the absolute good is no longer God.
Right.
The absolute good is the state, this utopian ideal. And because it's the absolute good, anybody who disagrees with it is evil and must be removed.
So BG, if you had to psychoanalyze these people, Lenin, Stalin, all of these fun people, would you say that this was something that they truly believed in as fanatics, or would you say that this was just their way of capturing power because they knew it's going to beguile and fool people?
Oh, I think it's just, again, they're just when people are no longer under the sway of Dharma, or they no longer have that sense of the sacred, and they become totally and utterly materialists, then killing people is just like this cup here. Let's remove it. It's just a bit ugly.
Right.
It's not. It becomes. They act without conscience. Do you see what I mean? So
but are they driven by their beliefs, or are they driven? This was just a tool for capturing further power, or do you think that this was actually?
Oh, no. It's all about power.
Okay.
You see, if human beings are not governed by love and the sense of the sacred,
right.
We know this in our own life. I know when I'm not governed by love, to that degree I become full of ill will and hatred.
Right.
And when I'm not governed by caring, to that degree I become indifferent and ruthless.
Yes.
And then we have the psychology of Dayananda that talks about binding desires, the desire for power. Okay, so I'm no longer moved by anything higher. The third and fourth striving are what saves us.
Right.
So, but if all I've got is security and pleasure, and I'm under the binding desire of power, of course I'll say it's good, because you've got to pitch something good. If you want to enroll people, you have to say that we're doing this for a wonderful cause.
Right.
But the problem is that once the supreme good becomes an ideal society, right? And then anybody who opposes that is the enemy. They're evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are removed. And what we're looking at now, even in the universities and in America and stuff, this whole identity politics and stuff is if you're not for us, you're against us, and if you're against us, we cancel you.
Right.
So we've got some. That's why I disagree with cultural Marxism.
Yes.
I don't believe the solution is destroying the past at all. Do you know what I mean? We can learn from the past, but the idea that we must protect, get rid of, start from, Pol Pot, start from zero. It's a whole fresh start, a new world order.
Right.
Everything else is bad and horrible except this utopian dream. That is, I just disagree with that philosophically. But that kind of thing. See, I think that traditional values. I believe in traditional values.
Right.
So, and I'm not right wing either.
Right.
I'm not left wing. I just that there are certain values that humanize human life. And like the value of right and wrong. Once that becomes obscured and denied, I think being able to see what's right and wrong and acting in accordance with what's right and avoiding what's wrong, I think that humanizes me as a person.
Yes.
Any philosophy that denies that I don't have conscience, it's just been built into me, it means really nothing, it's just culturally constructed, that reduces, I believe, me as a person.
Right.
So that's the difference, when we're looking at, see, Dayananda presents us with an entire map of human life with the four strivings, as we've gone to talk about.
Right.
The present contemporary thinking, particularly in the universities within the social sciences and all of that stuff, their whole premise is there's no truth, it's all relative, there's no right and wrong. Do you know what I mean? The only good is a transformed society that's utopian. And what we do is we want to bring about the society and we want to get rid of the people who are opposed to this. Mm-hmm. And there's even though these people talk about diversity, they don't really believe in it. It's diversity for them. So we've seen whenever people speak up against them, do you know what I mean? In the universities in America and here, they get into trouble.
So Biji, it almost seems to me that they do believe these things because that's how they are acting with such zealotry.
They are under the sway of scientific materialism, right, and they're under the sway of materialism. They are reductionists because they reduce human beings only to the strivings of survival and pleasure, security and pleasure. They're highly antagonistic to what we would call traditional values because they consider that oppressive. So, this is what we mean by the culture wars that are going on now. You know what I mean?
So this begs the question, we recognize a problem, we see the people being possessed by these problems. How do you reach out to the individual to get them to discard some of these thought processes?
Well, unfortunately, Swami Dayananda makes a very good point. You can't reach out to these people because growth is self-initiated. He says emotional growth is self-initiated.
Okay.
But you do need to protect yourself from the influences if you can, and your family and stuff like that. I think that's extremely important. Not to go to try and reform these people. That's not possible. That would be stupid because they can't help but be the way they see. Right. So you're not going to, and everybody, as we know, if you're under a psychology that is completely moved by pleasure and security, it'll just simply be a mindless dramatization of conditions and causes, because there's no inner movement, there's no inner direction. Do you see what I mean? And so, what's more important is the people who have a sense of the sacred, who have a sense of right and wrong, how to help them live a life, not to succumb to the cultural disease that's happening.
Right.
And like, for example, you Indians need to protect your culture and your traditions and your customs. It is not just simply a small thing, because it has to be protected. We have a thing, and traditionally we have a thing called defensive metaphysics. And this defensive metaphysics, I studied defensive metaphysics, or what you call apologetics. It's the study of how you defend things. So when I was at university, for example, and this postmodernist cultural Marxist stood up and makes this profound statement: there is no such thing as truth. Now, I'd studied defensive metaphysics, and so I went, is that true, is it? And everyone laughed, because he was saying, it is true that there's no such thing as truth. So implicitly he was saying there was truth.
Yes.
So to show the absurdity, it's very important to, if there's no defensive metaphysics, if there's no understanding of the reality principles and ideas, that if there's no correction of these reality assumptions, if people don't have them and know how to see that it's a mistake. You know, how we need to see it's a mistake.
Yes.
So can we just take, for example, have you ever seen the mistake that happiness is ego satisfaction? Have you ever seen people say in our Western culture, I just want to feel good about myself, and they believe that happiness is feeling good about myself. Have you heard this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when this translates psychologically, it's that self-esteem is the most important thing.
Yes.
That I can esteem myself. You see? So you see the dualism? I want to have a self that I can esteem.
Right.
Now, there's many psychologists and educationalists and stuff. They say, we've really got to build up the child's self-esteem. Have you heard this nonsense?
Yeah.
Right. Now, can we just have a look at that as an idea?
Okay.
Now, the thing is that that's based on the fact that the supreme good is, of course, the emotional feeling of being inflated and being liked and loved.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when you think about that, you know how when we talk about Vedanta, we look at something and we measure it against, will this lead to being free while living, this notion?
Right.
Okay, now, if I'm dependent on you for my sense of life and being, and dependent on you to like me and to approve of me, is this being free, or am I being emotionally dependent?
You're dependent because you seek validation.
Right. So here I am. I'm encouraged that self-esteem is important, and the way you build up someone's self-esteem is you tell them how wonderful they are.
Right.
Right? Now, Dayananda would say that any thought I have about myself is delusional, including the thought I am wonderful.
Yes.
Because it creates in what we call in Vedanta self-objectification. Right. So I'm making myself as an object, I'm taking myself to be this object, and I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if I'm caught in this self-esteem trap, then I'm at the mercy of everyone, because when they're treating me well and saying, Bede, yes, you're the most wonderful human being we've met, and I'll have an inordinate craving to get that in order to feel happy about myself. Right. I'm going to feel very good when you tell me that I'm okay.
Right. Exactly.
What chance do you think it is that I'm going to encounter people saying that things that, well, Beat, I don't like you, and I think you're maybe a bit of a jerk.
Quite high.
Right. So then I'm shattered.
Right.
So if in my relation to people, when they say something nice, I feel great. And when they say something bad about me, I feel terrible. I collapse. Is that being free?
No, you're caging yourself.
Right. And so the thing is that as a notion is a highly mistaken notion. It doesn't deliver freedom. The more I try to build up my self-esteem, it means that I'm setting up lots of experiences of being put down.
Right.
Because if I believe that my life insecurity comes from having a built up idea of myself that's wonderful,
Yeah.
Can you see how that's unreal and untrue?
Yes. So they have two questions over here.
Yep.
The first is what should be one's reaction or response to a praise or an insult? What should be the appropriate way to approach it?
See, well, the great thing that Dayananda says is that we need to practice remaining the same in the face of circumstances. So we need to stay the same in the face of praise, and we need to say the same in the face of. But now that doesn't mean to say you don't enjoy or like praise. It's when people are approving of you, it's a pleasant experience. Right. But you can have that experience without the self-objectification. The delusion of self-objectification. Oh, I am so wonderful because this person said something nice. So, for example, when you do a good tennis shot, right? It's a satisfying experience, isn't it? When you perform well.
Yeah.
Now there's nothing. That's just simply enjoying performing well. Right. But if I give this, and that's realistic, isn't it? It's a wonderful thing. It's a good thing. But then if suddenly, because I perform well, I think that I'm a wonderful human being superior to other people, am I being true and real now, or am I being false and unreal?
It's false.
I've gone into delusion as far as Vedanta is concerned.
Right.
Right. So now what about, so someone says to me, Beat, I really appreciate, the help that you've been giving me and stuff like that, right? And I go, oh my God, am I such a wonderful human being? Now, again, the fact of the matter is, because I'm social and I'm a human being, I'm going to find people saying nice things to me or whatever pleasant, right? Okay, that's fine. That's just simply, it's a nice experience. Okay, just the same way when someone acts in rejecting and hostile way, it's unpleasant.
Yes.
Right? So we're not talking about, but there's nothing unreal or untrue about that. The fact that I enjoy when someone says something nice, right?
Right.
Right. But as soon as I move into the self-objectification, I'm being untrue and unreal. I'm what Swami Dayananda says, I'm enclosed in my own world.
Right. Because
I am seeing it's there. And so suddenly I think that I'm pretty good. I'm a wonderful human being.
Right.
The problem is that when we dramatize ourselves as personality, as Swami Dayananda calls it, I'm not being myself.
Yeah.
I am not being free. So what happens is when it comes to self, when in my relation to other people, if I cannot remain the same, if I can't remain the same in the face of pleasant experiences and unpleasant experiences, I am completely being determined, aren't I?
Right.
And because of that, I'm no longer free. Now, Vedanta believes, and not only believes, it is an approach to learn to what it means to be free while living. Yeah. And that being free is not different from being true and real.
Right.
Do you see the difference?
Yes.
And not only that, I am not true and real unless I am actually responding in terms of Dharma.
Yes.
It's not possible to be true and real and live a wrong life. And so the Vedantic remedy for this rather stupid doctrine of self-esteem, sometimes people can use self-esteem in the right sense, right? But they normally don't, and it's problematic. We have in the West a crazy idea. We think that we can feel right without living rightly.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, this is madness. We think we can be happy without living happily.
Right. Entitlement disease.
Yeah, we think we can be in peace without living peacefully.
Yeah.
So if I'm fighting with my wife, the fact of the matter is, from Dayananda's point of view, I am not living peacefully, and I will be building disturbance into me. Well, it's obvious, because if I'm not being harmonious, in harmony with my spouse, how can I have a peaceful state of being? How can I?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? If I don't, so the question is that, like, if I'm counseling married couples, right?
Mm.
What's important is what happens between them, isn't it?
Yeah.
What they say and do and how they say and do. Now, the thing is that what's important fundamentally is that a happy relationship only occurs through living dharmically.
Yes.
Now, so when I start acting in such a way, I'm not acting in a harmful way. So what I'm saying and doing is helpful and constructive and kind, right? I'm bringing the value that's needed for that particular situation, and I'm doing it in the least disturbing way as possible.
Right.
Can you see how that brings me into harmony with something other than myself?
Yes.
So Dharma actually restores my proper relationship to what's in front of me,
Right.
something other than myself. The whole notion of self-esteem is I can feel good in myself,
Yes.
irrespective of relationship. It's madness.
So BG,
So
this makes total sense, especially in the case of adults, because we are reasoning creatures who can ultimately, as you said, place ourselves in the lap of Ishvara as
yes,
the goal to aspire for. But
yeah,
you also mentioned with regards to children, self-esteem. Let's say you have like an infant or a toddler who faces a lot of neglect from their parents, who
oh,
doesn't.
absolutely. Now, there are three things with children.
Right.
If you're punitive, you'll build up hurt.
Right.
Okay? So acting harshly or unkindly is extremely destructive, right? Being neglectful gives them a sense that they'll become, so one will build up hurt, being neglectful will build up being isolated, right? So neglecting them. And then lastly, and lastly, but the worst one, pampering them will make them weak.
Right.
So we've got to be balanced here. So these three things were articulated extremely well by a psychologist early in the century by the name of Alfred Adler. But
Could you repeat the name, please?
Alfred Adler.
Alfred. Okay.
He disagreed with Freud because he considered again that you have to contribute, and you've got to be social and all of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? So because Freud was more like in the internal processes, and he did some very good studies in that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But Adler was different from him. But the thing is that, so when we're dealing with our children, your job as a parent is to teach the children how to live rightly and truthfully.
Yes.
Now, these two values now in our culture, the postmodernists would say there's no such thing. But the thing is that, so for children, we have to get them, first of all, not to evaluate themselves, but we have to get them to evaluate their behavior.
Right.
It's absolutely important. So, we say to a child, so, okay, look what you did. Okay, so what happens when you act that way? Now, so the metaphor is, as a parent, when you help someone ride a bike, you hold the bike up for a while and you take the slack and then you slowly let it go so they can ride by themselves.
Right.
That's the metaphor for being a parent.
Right.
But what you want to do is you want to teach them the value of being truthful.
Okay.
That means that, okay, so when you get them to evaluate their behavior, not see, if I look at you like this and go, oh God, like this, non-verbally I'm telling my kid that he's bad. Now, we don't want to solidify the self-objectification. We're going to get that anyway, but what we want to do is that I'm rejecting the person.
Right.
Children need to be loved, Swami Dayananda says, because they're little.
Yeah.
They need to be loved, okay? So what happens is, by getting them to evaluate their behavior, it's you're teaching them to look truthfully at consequences, aren't you?
Right.
Now, how important do you think it is for them to act, to be able to be alive, to be able to learn to be objective, to be able to look at their actions and the consequences of their actions, to be able to go, that's wrong because it actually causes harm, and that's right because it brings about a good result. How important is that?
It's very important, yes.
Now, what you're doing is you're building inner strength. They're learning the inner direction of Dharma, aren't they?
Right.
Because you're using the words. When you speak to your little sister like that, in that unkind way, that is wrong because it produces unhappiness. Have you noticed that? You see, so you're not being dogmatic in forcing. Do what you're told. Don't do that.
Right.
What you're doing is you are teaching them to see the truth,
yeah,
and to see the value of Dharma. Now, and this, what's so important about that? Do you see the difference between me following external rules and the inner direction that Dharma gives me? Being actually moved by the fact that, see, Swami Dayananda says that the dynamic form of the basic person is love and care.
Yes.
So we are moved to be in harmony. That's what he means by love. It's being accepting, right? So we are moved to be that way in relation to other people and things, to be in harmony.
Yes.
We know that because when we're not in harmony, we don't like it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That because, and we only feel, if we didn't have the impulse of Dharma, we wouldn't care.
Right.
So we're moved by wanting to be, and to be caring when we see something that is happening. You know, there's a Buddhist story about even the criminal will actually grab a baby if it's near the well.
Ah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this impulse exists in all of us. So the thing is that what was important about Dayananda's teaching is that this impulse what moves us to be loving and caring.
Yeah.
If we do not conform our way of being in the world to this, it has a profound psychological consequence.
Right.
So Swami Dayananda fixes the error. There are some psychologists that don't like to use the word right and wrong because they think it's going to hurt the person.
Right.
Right? Swami Dayananda basically doesn't see the difference between our psychological misery and the way we're living. So in other words, and I've seen this in my own practice with people.
Yeah.
The more they conform their action to these inner core strivings, the stronger they feel as an individual.
Right.
And the more self-directed they come, so that their actions are not being determined by what happens. It's being determined by Dharma.
Right.
There can be no freedom without living a life of Dharma.
Right.
One of the worst mistakes in Western psychology is, and Freud was guilty of this too, they separate Dharma, conscience, ethics, and psychology. So psychology becomes, how do you feel? And what would make you happy, right? Whereas the real questions are, okay, how do we learn to live rightly? And that's for people who are having trouble in their marriages. Okay, how do you live rightly with, the issue isn't, what are your needs? Is she fulfilling your needs? Is she actually listening and validating you as a person? And all this nonsense. So what's important, excuse the French, is okay, how do you live rightly with your wife when she's doing what you want? And how do you live rightly when she's not doing what you want? That's more important.
Right.
That resolves the problems in a marriage.
Right. So BG, I was thinking that there are so many topics that are coming to mind just from this conversation. So,
Yep.
for example, you spoke about the shortcomings of Western psychology.
Yep.
And it would be nice to have a session dedicated to understanding the different forms of psychology and their validity. So, for example, if I understand correctly, behavioral psychology and cognitive psychology might be closer to what we are looking for in terms of making a person accountable for their own actions and inching towards the path of dharma. Or
I've got some problems with cognitive psychology, actually.
okay.
You see, behaviorism is this. You see, let's say, for example, I'm getting rejected by people, right? And then the behaviorist teaches me how to communicate nicer so that I'll become more acceptable to people.
Right.
Now, that's good. It sort of helps, right? But you see, Swami Dayananda's got this thing that we need to move from being moved by binding desires like to be loved and admired,
right,
to be moved by Dharma.
Yes.
So he said that we're mature when we want to do what we need to do. So emotional maturity means that we're moved differently. We're still moved emotionally, but we're moved by Dharma. We're moved by the desire to contribute.
So this might be a confusion on my part, perhaps, but from what I understood is, let's say we have a phobia or a fear of some kind, and in Vedanta.
Oh no! Yeah. No, I'm not talking about that. Oh. That's very good, and we slowly expose because
right.
Because that's a principle that's true. We're not saying there's no good techniques that come out of that. If someone's afraid of, and then you might get them. Like if you've got a real phobia, you might first of all get them. Okay, then just first of all have the thought of it. Now start to get closer to it, so that the person actually sees for themselves it's not dangerous. We're not, and that because the basic person, there is a simple basic person.
Yeah.
If they're with another person and they actually start to go into examining, right? Because we have a faculty of knowing that's proper to the simple conscious person, the faculty of the intellect that can actually see what's true,
right?
The faculty of discrimination that can sort out what's true and what's false. Vedanta uses that, right?
Right.
Of course, because that's universal to every person. So first of all, a good person who's a behaviorist will produce good results.
Yes.
So if you've got an ethical counselor who uses behaviorism, they'll get good results. If they're cognitive people, do you know what I mean? In the sense that they consider that it's how you think that causes you the problem, and they get you to think more realistically.
Yeah.
That's going to be helpful.
Right.
Right? There's no doubt about that. Do you know what I mean? So. And that goes with all of these other forms of psychotherapy, right? So but what you'll find is you can see why they work and why they fail with the Vedic psychology as unfolded by Dayananda. That's all I'm saying. So, yeah, go.
So in that sense, what you're saying is up to a certain level they work, and then we have to kind of take the leap. And do they all, is there a consistency between all of these models where you can leap off of these models and then move completely into the Vedantic psychology? Or would you prescribe like neglecting the models altogether?
Well, no, the thing, I'm not sure that first of all, I've been greatly helped by my study of Western psychology.
Right.
But the difference is when it comes to the Vedic psychology of Dayananda, I can look at that psychology from my Western point of view,
Right.
but I look at Western psychology from Dayananda's point of view.
Yes.
So I am a little bit slightly different, because the fact of the matter is that you can modify people's functioning so it's more helpful. Agreed?
Yes.
But that's what you would call counseling, right?
Right.
What Dayananda offers us and the Gita psychology offers us is it transforms what moves us. So when we come under the emotional sway, when we actually, what Dayananda says, emotional maturity is, I want to do what I need to do. So I'm actually moved emotionally, so that I find it when I'm not in harmony with my wife, I find it a kind of an aversion. So that'll move me to correct my behavior. Does that make sense?
Right.
So when I act in a non-caring way, I move to correct my behavior. So instead of being moved by binding desires, because when we're under the sway of binding desires, the longing for God and the strivings for Dharma do not move me.
Right.
So unless I can neutralize the binding desires, I am not going to come. The psychological change is not going to occur. And so, if in Western psychology, if there's a therapist who appeals to a person's conscience, right? They can do some good, but the universal principle is there,
Right.
that unless I as an individual become self-directed in the sense of being moved by Dharma,
Right.
where I want to be in harmony with people, and I want to act in a caring way, if that does not occur, I'm under the sway of my binding desires. Sorry.
I see.
I just can't see any way out of this. Like it's not that we're not doing a comparison saying, well, the only truth is Vedic psychology. We're not dealing with that kind of stupid notion. What Vedic psychology reveals is what moves a human being. And it is considered that when they are moved by love and care, their life goes far better than when they're moved by, say, for example, the desire for exciting experiences and social approval.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just difference in chalk and cheese. And because of the practice of karma yoga, how it enables us to come into contact with the fear and the self-dissatisfaction that move us, that fuel the binding desires, and so we can resolve that into Ishvara. Big difference in our life.
Right.
So so we recognize, you see, obviously truth exists in every culture, agreed?
Right.
If I'm seeing what is, that's the truth.
Right.
Now, St. Thomas Aquinas said the definition of truth was conformity of mind with thing. So when my mind is conforming with what's happening, I am seeing the truth. Now, obviously, that is a universal, that's a universal thing. So in the West, I can be truthful, can't I?
Right.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Now, if provided I'm not too caught up in subjectivity, I can see. So as a behaviorist, as a Western, as a cognitive psychologist, whatever, I can do things and I can help clients see the truth. And also I can help them see maybe the value of learning to live in the right way.
Right.
Now, but there's no explicit teaching tradition about this. It definitely happens. I've seen it happen. Because the Vedic, the four strivings is a total picture that shows the right place for everything. I've never seen that.
Yes.
I've never seen that in Western psychology. It's like what happens is you have, I get trained as a cognitive psychologist. So I have a certain way of what I see the problem as, and I see it as wrong thinking. But for example, I don't think the problem is with wrong thinking as such. It's true in the sense I see the problem as learning to see what is true and live in a right way. So I think I believe in the value of truth. The reason that I love Dayananda was not because he was a Hindu monk, because it doesn't mean much to me. I'm not a Hindu. Was that he unfolded the truth.
Yes.
That your mind could actually see this is true.
Right.
He also, more importantly, showed the importance of living in the right way. The value of ethics, that the value of the value.
Yeah.
So when you look at any of the Western psychology, what you look at it, if you look at it in the light of Dayananda's teachings, Dayananda was an embodiment of truth. Like really, he could just see the truth, and then he would speak from that truth, and then you would find yourself seeing what he was seeing, and you'd see the truth too.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? But also, he was a very dharmic human being. He was a very caring man. He built skill, and that was it. He didn't aggrandize himself as a guru like some of them do.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? He created schools. He saw the value of preserving his culture. He saw the onslaught of this secular, materialistic, humanism.
Yes.
So this ability. So what happens is he presents us with that first of all unfolds the truth. Also, the truth of what is the truth of what we really are? What does it mean to be me? What does it to be myself, not be a self? But what does it mean to be myself? And he showed the relationship between the fact that you can't be yourself unless you're rooted in reality. It's not possible. You can't. You see, in the West, we got this idea of I'm going to be my own self, and I'm going to find somehow in my own self, I'm going to find my own glory. He was quite clear that unless we're rooted in reality or rooted in God, we won't know what it means to be myself, because when I'm rooted in God, I become true and real.
Right.
So it was just so interesting to see a man. Here's this Hindu monk, different culture than me. But and we have in our West, we have this, the notion of goodness, beauty, and truth.
Right.
The thing is, he was very good. He was very true. And in our Western tradition, beauty is the splendor of truth.
Right.
And he was a beautiful human being.
True.
So he embodied, and this transcends culture.
Yes.
This is, truth and ethics, what's right. Do you know what I mean? Transcends culture.
Yes.
But in his teaching, he kind of leveraged those two things. Do you know what I mean? So that he could unfold the truth of like the four strivings.
Yes.
He could unfold the truth of, well, what is this? He answered so that you could actually see the three big problems. What am I? What's the world? And what's God?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And he covered, but he didn't try to get me to believe a set of beliefs.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? He was a guru in the real sense. He opened, and so that's why I see him as a universal teacher, and I see him particularly very important for the West, actually, because he's the one Hindu monk that I believe can make a huge difference to us people in the West because of the universality of his teaching. And his teaching is the Vedic vision.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. Do you know what I mean? So do you see what I mean by that? We take the Vedic vision that he unfolded. And then you can look at Western psychology and you can say, yeah, that's good. And you can, yep, that in that regard, just, and you can also see that Swami Dayananda saw the brilliance of Freud.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean to say that he agreed with everything Freud said or didn't see his limitations.
Right. Just take the best parts.
But if it's true, it's true.
I think if I understand correctly, Pujya Swamiji was also, he spoke often about the unconscious mind, and he spoke about archetypes as well. So I see that he had that influence, and perhaps many of his students were psychologists such as yourself. So there was that crossover.
Yeah. But he didn't, what he did was if he recognized it as true, it's true.
Right.
And also there is the thing of, there are different, language change and you communicate. I mean, when I communicate the Vedic vision to Western people, I use Western vernacular.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So he was very good at using words and different, and he would talk to us Westerners in terms also that we understood.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? He wasn't, because his whole interest was bringing us to see the truth.
Yes.
And also to learn how to live the right way. So you have these two principles that can evaluate everything. Everything. I mean, that was what was extraordinary about him. And then it becomes quite simple. So can you see that, for example, that this idea that mental health is feeling good about myself,
right,
is a profound error.
Yes.
But when I'm being moved by Dharma, and as we say in our Western tradition, religiously, the voice of Dharma, we got to listen to it, listen, hear, and obey. We have this thing of the voice of, listen, hear, and obey. We have to listen to the voice of Dharma, hear what it's saying, and obey it. It's very good to do this. It's because it is like what Swami Dayananda says, that Dharma is the presence of God in us as Dharma.
Right.
He even says that that you don't decide to do it, Ishvara decides what you're to do.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So God lives through us through Dharma.
Right.
So that our will and the will of God become one and the same when we're living a life of Dharma.
Right.
So it's not like I'm obeying external rules, for example. So he solves a lot of the religious problems that we've struggled with for years. You know what I mean? So the thing is that, so Western psychology, I think it's a profound mistake. So that it's a wrong. If I study Vedanta from a Western point of view, it'll become distorted.
Correct.
But I can look. So you don't study. If you study it from a Western point of view, it's not studying Vedanta. You have to see what Vedanta is first. But funnily enough, you can then from the Vedic vision, you can look at Western psychology and you can say, yes, that's good. That in fact, you can actually, it becomes more useful to you.
That's what I feel. Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Right.
Whereas the arrogance of a lot of Western scholars when they come to this, study of primitive Hinduism, it's not scientific or whatever, is that we study it. It's been studied from that point of view, so it's not actually studied. Because unless the Vedic vision of God comes alive in you, you can't understand the Vedic vision.
Right.
Unless you understand what Swami Dayananda means by living a life of Dharma, right, you can't evaluate Dharma.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So that's I think if I made that clear, do you see what I mean? If I made that,
it's a lot clearer now, definitely. So, but this
do you see what I mean?
Yeah, this actually helped make lucid a lot of thoughts I had as well, and I do have a few more topics that we can take up next time.
Yes.
So I'll give you a few recommendations once we close the recording. and then we can discuss
All right.
the next phase. So, Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Brahma Hari Om. Thank you, Virji.
Pleasure.